This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Hurting Hong Kong's future is never a good idea, as security and stability plays a vital role for its social and economic development. But rioters, radical protesters, and some irresponsible media are now spreading misinformation as well as encouraging violence to undermine the rule of law and the confidence that Hong Kong has exuded in the past. Now, as Hong Kong is seeing its slowest growth in decades, a stimulus package of 19 billion Hong Kong dollars, that's around 2.4 billion US dollars, will be injected into the local economy. So what lies at the heart of the Hong Kong issue? How will Hong Kong transform its economic and social structure to be even more vibrant? And what can be done to address the turmoil and make the pearl of the Orient shine once more? Now, to discuss these issues in the first part of our program, I'm happy to be joined in the studio by Charles Liu. He is the founder of How Capital, and Wang Cong, a reporter from the Global Times. We'll also speak to Dr. Tim Summers, a senior consulting fellow at the Asia Pacific program of Chatham House via Skype. That is our topic. This is Dialogue. I'm Michael Wong. Welcome, gentlemen, to the program. Wang Cong, I want to begin with you first, because the attack on a tourist and a journalist that we saw last week at the Hong Kong International Airport, that is drawing condemnation worldwide, but we're also seeing at the same time some false and misleading reporting by certain foreign media outlets. I want to get your take first in terms of what kind of double standards you might be seeing in terms of foreign and international media reporting on the issue that we see on Hong Kong. We're seeing the double standards in terms of perhaps even protesters being praised, but also sort of criticism on Hong Kong police, but even protesters who are extremely violent, vandalizing, for example, the legislative building, the Legislative Council building over in Hong Kong, attacking innocent people. So what kind of standards are you seeing?
Yeah, so when it happened that they attacked one tourist and my colleague, that kind of become the flashpoint where everybody's now talking about the violence, the riots that has never been talked about the way it is now. So yes, having following the media coverage of this and having been there, actually, I've seen the level of bias in some Western media and some Hong Kong media outlets. It's really appalling and very dangerous, worrisome, because they have been pushing for a narrative where they paint these protesters are pro-democracy. You still see this on the headlines. But when you actually view this is not pro-democracy. This is anti-government. This is violent riots. They demand that, demand some secessionist moves. So it's the best. It's ill-advised movement against something that is, the extradition bill. So the level of the bias, usually I think it's two parts. First, it's the ideological difference where everything that China touches, they'll have biased reporting. And the second is this tendency toward sensationalism and conflict. Right? In the U.S., if there's no conflict, it's not a story. So they tend to overstate some facts, and also, they pushing when they see some situation. When I was there, they focus on the police movement, for example, so they can push the narrative where the police use excess force against peaceful protesters. Yeah. But that's not the case there. So
yeah, sensationalism definitely gains eyeballs and gains more traction as well. Tim, I want to get to you. What do you think are sort of the some of the double standards that you're seeing in terms of how foreign media as well as Chinese media are reporting on this issue?
Well, I think I would say that, firstly, there's been a huge increase in media coverage and in interest in what's going on in Hong Kong over the last couple of months. That increase has risen again, even over the last week, perhaps prompted by not just the horrific scenes at the airport that you've described, but also by the fact that the airport was closed on 2 consecutive days. So I think many people are coming, many journalists are coming here afresh and reporting on the story. And I would say there's a lot of coverage out there. I haven't watched it all, but I would say there's quite a lot of variety in some of the coverage from outside China. Some is more critical, some is more balanced. I was watching a clip this morning from one of the UK news programs yesterday. The journalist interviewed some of the protesters. He also interviewed some of the people who were out at the sort of pro-government, pro-Hong Kong police rally. So I think there's a range of reporting that's going on here. And I wouldn't want to put all Western media or perhaps even all Chinese media into any single bucket. And I think as a consumer of media, what you need to do in this sort of situation is look at a lot of different media sources, look at what's on social media as well, and triangulate a bit, try and work out from that what some of the important developments are. It's a very complicated picture.
You mentioned social media, Tim. I want to get your take on that as well, because we do see these protesters and rioters coordinating online, sometimes spreading information that's false and misleading. So how much do you think social media is adding fuel to the fire in all of this?
I think social media is a huge factor in what's been going on. In many ways, social media is more important than the traditional media. I sort of feel that social media sets the agenda. It sets the parameters for the stories that the traditional print media and broadcast media then pick up on. Of course, social media is all around us, and it's a fairly new phenomenon still. Everybody is able to take control of their own story. They're able to develop their own perspective on reality. I think this is well documented, the echo chamber effect, people watching and listening to things that reinforce their pre-existing views. And I think we see, a very good example of that, of what's happened in Hong Kong. It's very easy for people to put stuff out there. There's none of the stuff that you journalists do and corroborate sources and corroborate facts. Things can go straight out onto social media from any source, from any side of the debate. And people try to shape the narrative that way. Shaping the narrative is part of the power that comes with setting the story in this day and age.
Charles, I want to get to you now, because we are seeing Chinese netizens rising up and sharing a different perspective as well, correcting some of the misleading and false information that we are seeing online. A lot of what they're saying are trending on social media in terms of supporting Hong Kong police and restoring peace and stability to the city. What do you make of these counter perspectives from the Chinese mainland?
I think its impact on the Western media and on the Hong Kong population is rather limited. I see it all over the place now inside China, that the netizens in China, including a lot of young people, are extremely unhappy about the way things have been portrayed by the West, by Western media. And it may arouse strong nationalism, which may not be the type of thing which is most constructive right now. For example, boycotting Hong Kong or boycotting Cathay Pacific. These things are beginning to happen. In fact, maybe not a movement, but if you see how hotels in Hong Kong are down 60 to 80% in terms of bookings, $800 Hong Kong a night hotel rooms are now going for $200.
Wow.
What does that mean for the Hong Kong economy and for the people in Hong Kong? So I think if the anti-demonstration aspect becomes anti-Hong Kong, it would actually be very, very negative for overall situation.
Can I say something?
Yeah.
First of all, I want to respond to what Tim said there, that there are some Western media who report on this. However, if you really read through, yes, their structure of their sentences of their reporting might want to put a balanced reporting. However, the tone you can clearly see, and also what Charles said. First of all, there's no boycott, I think, against one specific company. They're well-based. For example, Cathay Pacific incidents. They allow pilots, who have been charged for riot, who potentially face 10 years in prison to fly. That's clearly a safety issue. I think, yes, there are some, like you said, more aggressive tones on the social media you see, but mostly I think this is nothing. It's not about anti-Hong Kong, or it's not about we're hurting the Hong Kong economy. It's more about to preserve the Hong Kong economy, because these people, these riots, let's remember, these rioters are the ones who put the Hong Kong's future stability at risk, not the response. So yes, I understand there will be reactions that could be, a little more excessive. However, the overall tone is more of a national unity. I don't see any. Yes, there are frustration toward how Hong Kong people, some view the mainlanders, but overall it's more of a national unity. So I don't really see a problem where you see nationalism. Even if it's nationalism, I think Hong Kong is part of China, so I don't see a big problem there.
Yeah. Wang, I mean, you touched upon the legal aspect a little bit, because Hong Kong's Basic Law, Chapter 1, Article 1, says that the Hong Kong Special Administrative Region is an inalienable part of the People's Republic of China. I just want to get your take in terms of what kind of potential legal consequences may be facing these radical protesters, these rioters, because we've seen attacks on innocent people. We're seeing these people waving perhaps sometimes even American and British flags to attack people. So what do you think?
Yeah, that's the core issue that, for many people in Hong Kong and in the West, or, many people, they have a hard time to understand or accept, intentionally or not, to the one country, two system model, and that Hong Kong is a part of China. That everything happens there, it has to do with China too. So with regard to what's going to happen, unfortunately, I think I still foresee there will be more violence and chaos in Hong Kong, because these protesters, from sources in the Hong Kong police, that they are still planning on more protests. So I do still foresee more of that and more chaos. But we have all discussed about what the central government's role in managing or in responding to these protests, and there have been much discussion about how could we step in, and there are media reports where the paramilitary armed force is in Shenzhen. Yes, I want to remind that China, under the legal law, under the Basic Law, China has the rights to step in if that's necessary, if Hong Kong further falls out of control. To preserve the stability and the prosperity of Hong Kong, we can step in. However, that's the last resort. But when it comes to now, there's so much discussion about if China steps in, what would be the international reaction? Yes, it's one thing to stand there to voice your manufacturing concerns about Hong Kong and its status, but it's another thing to take responsibility. These Western, politicians, they say this is a beautiful site, but clearly they don't have the Hong Kong's future in mind. But China has to take responsibility if something happens to Hong Kong. So that's a last resort, and if that comes to play, then what's the reaction, I think, is not important as taking care of Hong Kong.
Tim, I want to get your last word on this, because we heard from K. Shanmugam, Singapore's Minister for Law and Home Affairs, telling the South China Morning Post that some international news media have misrepresented the events in Hong Kong with superficial analysis. And we know that Singapore has said before, Lee Kuan Yew, talking about in terms of bringing a team of lawyers against anyone who misrepresents the facts from the government in misleading directions as well. What do you think about that route potentially for Hong Kong going down the road?
I think it's a very fast-moving situation. Events are unfolding, almost day by day at the moment. It's actually very hard as an analyst or as a reporter to sort of get to the bottom of what's going on. And I think, personally, I tend to be suspicious of any simplistic narratives, because I think there's a huge range of complicated factors here. I mean, clearly all of this sort of sudden interest from Western media means that people are coming here without a lot of knowledge of the background. I mean, Hong Kong is complicated. One country, two systems arrangement is not straightforward. People do tend to look at anything to do with China through a certain sort of prism, a certain sort of framework. And so I'm sure that does, in some way colour the sort of reporting and the tone of reporting that often goes back to audiences in the West. But there's a wide range of views out there. It's a complicated situation. I think it's very difficult to generalize.
Okay. All right. We're going to leave it there. Many thanks for your insights on that. Tim Summers of the Asia Pacific program at Chatham House. We're also joined by Wang Song, a reporter at Global Times, as well as Charles Liu of How Capital. We're going to take a short break. When we come back, we're going to talk about how all of this, how the unrest is impacting Hong Kong's economy. Stay tuned.
You're watching breaking news on CGTN.
Watching CGTN with the latest market-moving headlines from around the world. Welcome to the world today on CGTN.
Images may appear to be identical, but looks can be deceiving. The difference is not always obvious. It has to be discovered. There are always different sides to a story. We put the focus on the details. To see more, to understand better. CGTN. See the difference.
Welcome back to Dialogue here on CGTN. In the second half of this program, I will be joined again in the studio by Mr. Charles Liu, founder of How Capital. We will also speak to Dr. Edward Se. He is the founder and CEO of Gaofeng Advisory Company. We're going to speak to him via the telephone, as well as Robert Kep, director of the Economist Corporate Network, via Skype. Charles, I want to begin with you because according to the latest Global Financial Centers Index, Hong Kong ranks number 3 in the world in terms of being the most important global financial center. It ranks number 1 actually in terms of human capital as well as for infrastructure. So given the unrest that we are seeing in the city right now, how do you think that's going to impact Hong Kong's status as a financial hub?
It's going to impact it massively, there's no question. Since most of my financial transactions are also conducted in Hong Kong, I can tell you the delays because of the rioting and complications and flight schedules is already putting a damper on a lot of the businesses that we conduct. I see friends in the business looking at Singapore or Shanghai or even just across the border in Qianhai, in Shenzhen.
Yeah.
So what is going on in Hong Kong in terms of financial side is suicidal, because for finance you have to be stable and secure. You can't have meetings scheduled and people can't fly in because the airport has been blocked and flights canceled. Cathay Pacific flights, 200 some were canceled.
Yeah.
So I think this is going to have some pretty long-term damage to Hong Kong.
Edward, if you can hear me, I want to get you into the conversation as well, because the unrest that we're seeing in Hong Kong, this is not just simply Hong Kong's issue. This is going to affect the regional economy because this is such an important international financial hub. I want to get your take in terms of what the unrest in Hong Kong means specifically for the world's largest economy, the United States, because there's tremendous financial linkages between New York City as well as Hong Kong.
Yeah, first of all, my apologies. I wasn't able to make to the studio tonight because, as you know, there were protests and riots on the streets on Hong Kong Island. So I really apologize for the inconvenience.
Yeah.
But for your question, clearly the world, despite, what the U.S.-China trade war is happening, the world is still very interconnected from a financial services standpoint. And the world actually would benefit from a very stable China. And of course, Hong Kong is a major window, a financial hub for China. and therefore any unrest or any uncertainty with respect to Hong Kong as a position as an international financial hub will have ripple effect for the rest of the world, including that of the USA and, of course, New York.
Charles, I want to ask you again, because this is the top financial center in Asia, Hong Kong, that is, and we know that the SAR is a key pillar to China's overall economic development and its internationalization efforts. So how do you see Hong Kong's status as an international financial hub in the context of one country, two systems?
Well, like you described, it's a window. So Hong Kong is not because it's more clever, it's not because it's more sophisticated, it's not because it's more professional. It had the opportunity of serving as a window for China, is what made it become the financial center. So ultimately, what happens to Hong Kong impacts on China, but Hong Kong cannot make do as part of China to prosper without the hinterland behind it. So I think ultimately there's no breaking the two. If things slow down in Hong Kong, it's going to impact on China as well.
Okay.
Because the Chinese financial system is still not a completely open system.
Okay.
It needs a window.
Got it. Robert, I want to get to you because the Hong Kong economy not doing so well right now. Seems like we can't get to Robert right now. So Edward, I want to bring it back to you because the SAR government, of course, recently cutting its forecast of Hong Kong's GDP growth now to just between 0 to 1% compared to its previous estimate of 2 to 3%. So that's quite a big drop, 2 percentage points. Right now, as you see, what do you think is contributing to Hong Kong's challenges when it comes to social and economic problems?
Right. The impact on the financial performance in Hong Kong is incredible. As you said, the Hong Kong government has adjusted down the projection to 0 to 1%. I think in the short term, we're going to see this sort of downturn, and it's going to have impact on businesses across the board, including hotel, travel and tourism, retail, and so on. But in my view, the more fundamental challenge for Hong Kong is how to address the deep structural issues. And these issues are related to issues such as extremely high property prices, the high degree of control by big businesses for the entire Hong Kong, as well as the general lack of upward mobility for the Hong Kong young people. These are major issues that would need a lot of time to try to address.
And Edward, so you mentioned structural issues that, of course, require long-term reforms. But when it comes to what we see right now, we know that the Hong Kong local government injecting around $2.4 billion in terms of this economic stimulus package. That's going to include, for example, subsidies to lower-income families as well as to students. We're also seeing, for example, boosting payments to Social Security recipients and upping the amount of personal income that is tax-free. So how much do you think this economic stimulus package will support the local economy in Hong Kong right now?
I think these measures are good, and the government should exercise them as quickly as possible, because Hong Kong, no matter whether it's individuals, small businesses, small to medium-sized businesses, and even for the large businesses, really need a lot of short-term financial support. And these measures need to trickle down in the Hong Kong society as quickly as possible. To what extent you can really, in a way, remedy some of these short-term issues that we're now seeing, I think perhaps partially, but it's going to be extremely difficult to uplift the entire economy in one shot. It's going to take some time. But without addressing the structural issues that I mentioned, it's going to be very hard for Hong Kong to revive its position as before.
Okay. Robert, it seems like we've got you on the line now. Robert is the director of the Economist Corporate Network, joining us via Skype. Robert, I want to get your take in terms of how the unrest that you're seeing in Hong Kong right now, how that's going to impact the local economy, especially the city's status as a major international and commercial hub.
Well, in terms of short-term impact, that's significant. We see the Hong Kong economy going into recession this year. That's off of 3% growth last year, which is quite high, down to 1.7% growth this year. We've seen a decrease in property sales, both in volume and value. We've seen a huge drop off on the retail sector and tourism, and the stock market has gone down. So all of that is very significant. However, long term, the institutions that make Hong Kong so strong, its capital markets, it still has the world's most active air cargo hub, and it still has an outstanding rule of law. And I don't see that in any way impacted. They've been challenged, but they haven't been seriously offset. So long term, Hong Kong still looks good.
Then, Robert, if these unrests continue, this is now heading into the 11th consecutive week. Who stands to lose the most from all the instability that we're seeing?
Well, temporarily, I mean, everyone loses. Instability isn't good. But if you're trying to address concerns and there isn't a mechanism in the government political system for doing that, hopefully this will bring about a positive change. So there's near-term losses, but hopefully the government will find a better way to address social concerns going forward.
Charles, where does Hong Kong go from here? What does the local government need to do to stabilize the situation? And where does the Hong Kong economy, you think, go from here?
Well, I think the most important is for Hong Kong to stabilize, period. But this may take a much stronger management role by the government. The government has so far not been very aggressive. For example, in other countries, like the Paris Yellow Vests, if you're arrested, you're arrested. You're not let go by the courts the next day. So, things in Hong Kong are, I think, lax compared to what developed countries, Western countries, in how they deal with rioting. And if this continues, it boosts the confidence of the extremes radical part to continue to do what they do. But strategically, the Chinese government has a very clear plan. For Hong Kong to develop further, it has to integrate into the Greater Bay Area, because Hong Kong benefited from China's rise, but Hong Kong is no longer as necessary for China as it was 30 years ago.
Yeah.
So I think that has to be taken into account. And for Hong Kong to have a future, for example, as I was mentioning to you, 170,000 engineers from Taiwan are working in Shenzhen.
Yeah.
Why? Because that's the future.
Yeah.
Shenzhen's GDP is now bigger than Hong Kong.
And speaking of Shenzhen, we saw a series of policy measures released today in terms of wanting Shenzhen to integrate itself more in terms of financial cooperation between Shenzhen and Hong Kong. Where do you think this financial cooperation will come from? How do the two cities better work together on that front?
Well, I think Hong Kong provides its experience in the capital markets. It provides a lot of participants in the financial sector. Shenzhen has a different setup. The Chinese way of doing financial markets, which is still not quite up to international standards. So Hong Kong could help Shenzhen move up the ladder and become more sophisticated and become more global. All of this is possible, but Hong Kong has to accept, number one, it's not whether or not it's a principle, it's a fact that Hong Kong is part of China. And number two, for Hong Kong to have a future without manufacturing anymore, with problems in tourism, with all kinds of social and economic issues, you have to integrate into the Greater Bay Area to go somewhere.
And real quick, Charles, because out of these new policy measures announced today, it also said that Shenzhen will lead in terms of R&B internationalization. And we know, of course, Hong Kong is the largest offshore R&B hub right now. So how do you think this relationship is going to work out?
Well, I think Shenzhen will lead because of, I don't know if this is public information, but China is quick on its way to develop a cryptocurrency.
Yeah.
And Shenzhen is leading that.
Okay. All right. Still so much to be discussed on this topic, but we are out of time right now. Many thanks for your insights on this. Charles Liu, founder of How Capital. We were also joined by, of course, Robert Kep, who is the director at the Economist Corporate Network, as well as Edward Se, who is the founder of Gaofeng Advisory Company. That is Dialogue for today. We'll see you again same time tomorrow. Bye for now.